these projects aren't, they can't happen without funding. So thank you to everyone involved with providing funding and getting these projects up and running. And just as an aside, most of you would have heard about the grazing trials now at Wintinna and at Buckleboo, but we've been really lucky that we've been able to get some funding to install and implement technology and trial new tools to really try and understand grazing management implications and how livestock behave and use the country. And I think one of my favourites has definitely been Ceres tags, and I've been so impressed to see this virtual fencing come on off the ground as well. As you might have guessed by the video, this trial is a little way in now. So the trial, the heifers were first collared back in March, and the film was made only 5 weeks after that started. So now I'd like to introduce Megan Willis again to you all. And Megan's based in Struan, which is down near Narracourt at the research farm down there. And so you can imagine she's got a fair old trip to get up to Wintinna. So we're also really grateful to you, Megan, that you've given this project so much support and allowed it to happen. So yeah, Megan's going to give an update now on progress since this little film was put together. So over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. As Andrea said, this video was filmed about 5 weeks into the trial, and we're now 4 months in. So we have had a bit of progression since then and have a few updates to share. The trial started in mid-April, so we've had some good coverage over autumn and winter and about to come into spring, with Jake and Frankie looking at mustering pretty soon. So we've had a really good coverage across a growing season for them. I just want to start with the paddock configurations that we've had in place for these guys. So we used one of their paddocks called Dead Finish. I think when we first started this project, I said to Jake and Frankie, what's your smallest paddock? We'll start with that. And we landed on about 45 kilometres squared. So that's the area that we're working with. We've got 100 heifers in that space, as Frankie said earlier in the video. So I just wanted to run through some of the paddock configurations that we've been working with. When the video was filmed, I think we'd only just done our second paddock configuration. So we were still very much playing with it and working out how it was all going to work. So up on the screen there, if everyone can see that, we started off with a training period. So when you implement virtual fencing in livestock, you need to have a training period first with naive animals so that they're able to learn that association between the audio and the pulse signals that they're going to receive. So what we had, sorry, that's my screen. So what we had was the initial training period there on the left was, I think, about 3 or 4 days, where Jason set up a virtual boundary around the actual boundary of this smaller training paddock, which from memory was about 1 kilometre squared or 1.5 kilometres squared. So that was really just the animals learning, okay, we've got this collar on and it's giving us signals. What does it all mean? And after a few days, we implemented this back fence that you can see on the right there. So the yellow indicates the area where the animals receive their audio, and then within that red area is where they receive a pulse. So really communicating that exclusion zone to them. And you can see within those areas, there are GPS heat maps. So the green and the blue areas in there are the animals' movements throughout those periods in that training session. So you can see that they learnt pretty quickly from that first training period with the virtual boundary around the physical fence, that the signals meant, okay, I need to stop. And so you can see on that, the photo on the right, we had fairly good response to that second training fence. After about a week in total, they went into dead finish. So I'll just hold on. Slide down with me. There we go. So dead finish, they went in there and they had this first vent set up. So this was purely just to start them out in that paddock and keep them off of that top boundary of that paddock there. And we had this one in place for about 4 weeks. All of these paddock configurations, by the way, have been discussed, like with Jake and Frankie. It's really been driven by them. And then Jason, obviously being the technical expert, has done all the paddock configurations on a online platform for us. So these are all GPS enabled, and you just draw them on the platform, and the tower speaks to the collars and lets them know where that is. So this was, yeah, that first events that we had set up, and you can see here in this screen grab, the cattle are where they're meant to be. It's a pretty big area, and we just really wanted to look at the interaction that they would have with that boundary. Their watering points in here, so they're fairly happy to just sit down there and access their pasture and their water and not cause any issues. And this was a heat map of that. So you can see they were really responsive to that virtual fence, and the containment was really good. You can see a little bit of wandering up this waterway here, indicated by that blue shading there, but generally really, really good containment. So after about 4 weeks, Jake and Frankie thought they wanted to condense the animals a little bit more and give the right-hand side of the paddock a bit of a rest. So what we did was we implemented this virtual fence configuration. So contain them down sort of in the bottom left third, I guess you'd say, of that paddock, where they still had access to their watering points and that extensive kind of creek system in there, where a lot of the pasture growth was occurring at that time. So this was a bit more of a test because they had that virtual boundary on all 4 sides, keeping them in that little rectangle. It's not really a little rectangle, I suppose, if you're from south of South Australia. You think it's still a really large area, but to keep 100 heifers in that area at Wintinna was, yeah, something different. So it was really exciting to try. And this was a heat map we saw during that period. So they were in there for about 8 weeks. And as you can see, there was really, really good containment during that time. You can see the distribution of the animals throughout the paddock. So the green is where they spent the most time, and that tends to follow the watering system there. So the creeks that run through where there's a lot of pasture. But that was a really, really good result for us to see that containment. So after that, Jake and Frankie wanted to muster these cattle so that they could come in and adjust the collars, because they'd had a really good season and the collars were getting a little bit tight because the animals were growing rapidly. So they were coming in to do that. So we thought we'd try using the virtual fencing to assist with the mustering process. So this was what Jake and Frankie and Jason came up with, was this mustering lane in the paddock. So that was changed about 24 hours prior to Jake going in and mustering these cattle. I just really want to hand over to Jake and Frankie to talk about this process a little bit, because I wasn't at Wintinna when it happened. And Jake and Frankie will be able to compare what this looked like compared to what a normal muster might look like for them in this paddock. So are you guys happy to pop your mic on and just talk through that process a little bit?
Yeah, we just put them into that lane before the muster, and we only took 2 bites out there, and would have been about 2.5 to 3 hours, and we're all done the muster back out of the paddock. We normally would be sort of 4 to 5 hours with 3 bites and a plane in there, like to clean the paddock out, and ended up with 100% in the muster.
And we've never had 100% muster anywhere before.
Yeah, not without doing it a couple of times.
And you could log on, couldn't you? And
Yeah, when on the hill there we get phone service, so I rang Jason and then he could look on there and see if we had them all coming along the road. So it's really useful for the muster, like you can see where they are in live time.
and next time we'd make it, like if we were to do it again, we'll make it a lot smaller. Because even though it looks quite small on the screen, it was still a large area that took a while to cover the paddock, or cover that area.
Yeah, and you guys will be mustering this paddock again sort of in the next month or so, wouldn't you, or the next 6 weeks? So you will have the opportunity to try that out and see how it goes.
Yeah, I think we'll try about half that size for the next one and see if we can keep them in the lane.
Yeah, no, cool. Thanks, guys. So they were only in there for, I'm not sure exactly how long, but it would have been about 24 hours or 48 hours or something in that lane. But this was the heat map for that time. So you can see there's a little bit more wandering going on, but this could have been the animals still kind of finding their way into that lane because it is such a large area. But even still, like that distribution of cattle compared to what would traditionally be probably most of that paddock when you're going in mustering is a pretty big benefit for these guys. And so the current fence that we have going on, so I should say when Jake and Frankie mustered these particular cattle to come in and have their collars checked, you saw in that video that Jake had a few concerns in the beginning about how virtual fencing might interact with the temperament of the animals, because these guys spend a lot of time and effort on getting their cattle really calm and really quiet. And I've never seen cattle so quiet. Like down, I told these guys, like, our cattle at Struan compared to theirs up there are mad, and ours are handled all the time and theirs are handled nowhere near as much as ours, but they just put so much effort in. And it's really amazing to see what they've done with their cattle. So it was totally fair enough that Jake had a few reservations about that and thought, oh, maybe, you know, we'll see what happens here, because when we're out filming that video, a few of the collars beeped because animals were close to the boundary and they were in that rectangle shape. And Jake and Tane were out in the car and they really struggled to get the animals to kind of pull up and calm down. So yeah, there are a few concerns there, but when they did come in, Jake and Frankie were fairly happy with the way that the cattle were in the yard. So I might just throw back over to you guys to talk about that a little bit more and some of your concerns and what you saw when you actually brought them back in.
Yeah. Yeah, when we put them out there, we were a little bit concerned about them, like with the beep and the zap, to see how their temperament would change. When we seen them in the paddock, they're still quite new to the collars, and the beep set them off, and they didn't want to block up too much. Not in a bad way, just they sort of moved off a bit quick for what we like. But then once we got them in hand mustering, there's like zero ill effect to them at all. They're exactly the same as when we put them in the paddock. But even once we put them in the yard, we're a bit concerned they might get a bit agitated coming up to the race, like after we put the collars on last time they were in there. But I had no ill effects at all.
And as soon as we put the collar on them, it didn't take them long to get used to having something hanging around the neck either. Like they came out the crush and did a little buck, and then they just settled down straight away. A couple of minutes in, it was no different to having an ear tag in.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Jake,
sorry, go Andrea.
Sorry, Megan, I've got a few questions. I might just read them out now. That laneway with the 29th of July muster, how wide was that? Was it?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I didn't measure it, but it'd have to be a K or more across.
Yep, it's about 1 kilometre wide. So you were saying next time you could make that smaller, as in narrower?
Yeah, I tried a bit smaller because it still took in a fair bit of creek system to go and check with the bikes. if we just narrowed it in a bit, we'd avoid a fair few of the thicker timber.
Yeah, and Megan, this might be a question for you and for Jason, but what's the process to get the animals into the lane ready for mustering? Could you explain that that process about getting animals back into a new fence?
Yeah, Jason can probably speak to that, how the animals move into a new area and adjust to a new fence.
Yeah, the way that there's several ways they can do it, but the way we did it with Jake and Frankie was we sort of set up the area we thought was an appropriate, well, I thought was an appropriate size to capture them, because they were coming in for a drink every day, but not all cattle will necessarily drink every day. In theory they do, but there are times when they don't. So as a rough guide, I try and set it up sort of 48 hours or a little bit more if you can prior to when you need them to be captured. When they go through into the capture area, they get no stimulus or cues coming in. It's only if they try to go back out, like it's a one-way gate. So they don't even know that a time when they're coming back into the capture area. When they then go back out, they get the audible cue and they realise that the lane is now the new spot to stop. I set that up conservatively wide purely because it was the first one that I had really done myself to capture cattle, and I wasn't really sure how they would respond if they were walking along the road that was in the middle of that capture area, if they wandered left or wandered right and got some stimulus. I wasn't sure if they would turn around and try and go back towards the dam, or whether they would just go back onto the road. But it didn't really come into play all that much, and they gave us no trouble whatsoever. So I think next time we would definitely make it at least half the size. And you can see on the screen on the bottom right, there's an opening there. We have that's where the gate goes out of that dead finish into the next paddock on the way back to the yards. We also like to set up those three. Even that initially, Jake said to me just to do this paddock around the perimeter of the whole paddock, and I said to him I'd prefer to leave an opening. That way, if you needed to get them out in a hurry, they could always go back out through the gate that they know is there and feel comfortable using, and have no fences in play. So that's basically how we sort of set it up.
Great, thank you, Jason. No more questions, Megan, if you want to keep going.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, this is current. So this screen grab I took today to put on this slide. I think it's pretty cool. I could log on right now to the Vents platform and see where these heifers are in that paddock, all the way from Struan. I find that pretty cool. Jake and Frankie probably don't realise how much I actually spy on these cattle, because I just think it's so fun to be able to monitor them from so far away. So yeah, that's where they are at the moment. They've been in there since they came back from that muster or slightly after. And this is the heat map that I've generated for that time. So as you can see, pretty standard distribution across the paddock, with congregation around these sort of areas here. Also, one thing that this shows, which we know happens, but I still think it's just they're just such clever creatures, and it shows the way that the technology is designed. They make use of that entire area again. So it really does show that they're responding to that audio. They're not associating that boundary with any physical landmarks or anything. So they're really quick to make use of the paddock again once that virtual fence is expanded out. So they're very, very clever. That's probably it for those configurations. One other thing I wanted to touch on is that on the 27th of June, Jake and Frankie had a significant rainfall event up there at Wintinna. So I think they had about 35 or 40 mil of rain overnight. And the morning of the 28th, I logged on to check the cattle, as I do, and I saw that there were about 12 that had got out. They were back in with the mob when I saw them, but you can tell if they've been out, and the collar can disable. So I rang Frankie and I said, oh, what's going on? There's some that are out. And she said, oh, well, we've had nearly 40 mil of rain last night. So it was really interesting to see how when that rainfall event happened, the cattle kind of dispersed, and a few of them went probably a little bit far out of the inclusion zone and went wandering, but they actually came back in and joined their mates again and were contained again the next morning. So that was really interesting to see that as well, and just shows that, you know, things you think, oh, that's a bit of a hiccup, but actually it was quite cool to see how they responded to that. Just any comments from you, Jake and Frankie, about any further updates since the video? Anything that I've missed, anything that you want to add before I go to the next part?
Not really anything to add to what you were just saying then, but it is quite good how if them 12 had escaped the paddock after a rain event normally, or they hadn't come back in, we wouldn't know till we went to get cattle back and we were short. But like you could track them to where they'd gone, so we could see where they'd gone, but they came back in.
Yeah. I've just
Megan,
seen
there's a question
yeah.
here about the rain. So does the rain disable the collar, or is it the animal behaviour that changes?
Yeah, sorry, that probably wasn't well explained by me. It's actually the behaviour of the animal. So Jason might want to speak to this, but the collars have a function where if the animals go out and spend too much time out, the collars can shut down to give the animals a break to then come back in their own time. And that's what I mean by they disable. But you can then enable them again using the vents platform. Jason, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think sometimes what happens too, there's a multitude of reasons they go out, but in this case, it may well have been just a clap of thunder, or a few claps of thunder that spooked them, and they ran 100 meters or 200 meters before they realised, you know, and they're outside of the area. But if they go out and get, you know, like there is a fail safe in the system where if they get too many shocks, like you were saying, they just shut down, and we get an alert to say that it's shut down, or I can just do a reset, or the user can do a reset and it turns it back on again. We actually have it set up on some properties where there's an auto reset, but not everybody wants to do that because they want to know the reason it needs resetting, and is it something they can do differently to avoid ending up in that scenario. But it's just set at a level that we're comfortable with, and it's a level that's adaptable by the users. They can decide how many times they need the animal to be give the stimulus before it gets reset, or before it shuts down. Sorry, so it is a user option to decide that.
Yeah. There's also just another question in the chat that Jason, you can probably answer while you're off mute. What percentage of the herd do you realistically need to collar?
Well, I got asked the question the other day, and it's do we want more of them collared so we can make more money? And that's 100% not what's driving it. What drives us is the success of the program. If the less cattle you have, the less effective or collared, the less effective it becomes. The real magic number is sort of 75% and below. You know, if you were to turn off a quarter of them, you would then start to see lesser results. And it is definitely not a dollar-driven decision. It's just more successful when all the cattle are in. We've had cases with our collars, and I think the other companies have had the same, where you get uncollared cattle jump in from another paddock, and it might be 10 or 15%, whatever it may be. The cattle will see them go out to fresher feed or go to a different water, and their instinct is to try and follow them with the herd mentality. And it's a bit hard to tell them, I'm sorry, you can't go there. So having as many collared as possible is desirable from a effectiveness point of view, not a dollar-driven point of view.
Yeah, and probably an animal welfare point of view as well.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
There's a bit of research in sheep for those joining who might have sheep or are interested in sheep. There's a bit of research of what proportion of a mob needs to be collared for virtual fencing to be effective, given they're more mob-based in their distribution around the paddock. And I think their sweet spot is about the same, like close to that 65-75% mark as well. I might just park the questions for a second and we'll come back to them at the end. I'll just give a little bit of a where to from here, and then we can go full on into questions and a bit of a discussion. So from here, Jake and Frankie might decide that they want to put a new paddock configuration in place, depending on what the pasture's looking like and what's going on out in the paddock. And then they will be mustering in, you know, the next month to 6 weeks, I think. I might be wrong. Jake and Frankie can jump in and correct me, but when they muster, we will trial that smaller mustering lane again. They'll come in and we'll take some final measures, so some live weights and things like that, take all the collars off. And that will be the end of this activity, this particular trial. Andrea started running the numbers for the return on investment of virtual fencing in this particular scenario. So in a pastoral production system, with the cost that only pastoral systems have, like mustering and things like that that come into it, and, you know, huge labour inputs and vehicle costs and fuel costs just getting out to cattle compared to what the rest of the state might experience. We're looking into a case study as well, so we've started putting together a story about what we've done at Wintinna and the findings. So those figures and the case study will be available for people as well. I'm sure Andrea will distribute that to her contacts, and we've got contacts of who's online now, so there will be resources like that available as well. And we're really looking for opportunities to keep this sort of work going in the pastoral regions. So acknowledging that virtual fencing has a probably much higher value to pastoral enterprises than it may have to other enterprises in more southern parts of the state and southern parts of Australia. So we really want to keep this sort of work going. And the more we do, the more confident producers are in taking this sort of tech on, solving problems on farm, and hopefully a legislation change comes through to support that as well, so that people can get more involved. So that's probably it from me. Andrea, if you wanted to take over again.
Yeah, sure. We might kick off with some questions, a few more questions, if that's all right. This one's for you, Jason. So how are the collars powered, and do they have a lifespan?
Yep, they have one, currently they have one singular 3.6 volt long life battery in it. The battery life is 100% determined by how much you ask that collar to do. If you ask that collar to do nothing except tell you where it is, like a Ceres tag, it'll last about 2 years. If you ask it to do what Jake and Frankie are doing, it'll be somewhere between 9 months and 12 months. If you go really intensive cell grazing where you're shifting every day, it could be as little as 4 to 6 months if you're really drilling it and asking it to do lots of stuff every single day. Now, what runs the battery down is not necessarily the audio or the stimulus. It's the fact that whilst the cattle are near an active vents, the collar doesn't shut down. It's constantly thinking, do you want me to do something? So we're actually in the middle of designing a system where if it goes in, for instance, to a shade camp that may be 400 metres from an active vents, rather than it thinking for 3 hours while the beast is camping, it'll realise that it's there every day, that it's a shade camp where there's a trough. It'll just shut down and only get active when it gets, say, 10 or 15 metres from the fence. So that's one of the things we're doing, and we're also dramatically going to improve the battery life with a completely different battery system, either late next year or early 2025. We've got an exciting new change happening, which is going to change everything dramatically as far as battery life.
I'll just quickly add as well that Vents are one supplier of virtual fencing, and there is another supplier present in Australia, which is Gallagher E. Shepherd, and they have a solar powered collar. So there are different options available. The Vents product has worked really well, and at Wintinna, and the battery system has worked quite well so far as well, and it probably works in okay with mustering frequency and stuff to be able to change out batteries and things. But just so everyone's aware that there are different options for different production systems as well.
All right, another question for you, Jason. So when the collars shut down, are you still able to get a location on where the cattle are when those collars do shut down?
Yes, you can see where they are. It'll just say sound disabled or sound and audio disabled. There's two ways you can do it. I can just go. You can have it auto reset, or I can just have it go in and click re-tick those two boxes and press save on each animal. Or if for some reason there was a lock went out, I could just do a right click on the icon of the mob and just say reset all, and it'll just reset the whole paddock with a couple of clicks of the mouse. But you can definitely see them when they're out. You can see where they are. They're just not actively part of the stimulus process.
Yeah, and that might have partly answered the next question about escaped stock. So if you've got a large number of stock that have escaped, can you zone them separately and keep them contained before they rejoin the herd?
Yeah, you can do lots of different ways of doing it. Sometimes in bigger paddocks, what we'll do is we'll quickly draw another, like a capture, like we did with Frankie and Frankie's paddock there, and Jake's. We can draw a capture so that if the paddock, for instance, was in some cases you might have a 200,000 acre paddock, and they've only gone 2 or 3 kilometres outside your zone, you can draw another capture fence to stop them going any further. And then you can you can let them come back in their own if there's, which they will if they've got no water outside, or if they've got water, you can bring them back in with a moving line. But the moving lines do draw more battery, but they do work. That's something we're still working on perfecting, but we do have it working, but it's not as perfect as we would like it to be, but it is an option.
Fantastic. And can you schedule fence changes to progressively rotate or concentrate animals ready for mustering?
You can set it 12 months out, whatever you like. It makes no difference. As long as you've got somebody on the ground who's checking the pastures, because we can't see, accurately what it's doing. So you still need bums on the ground. But you can program rotations, and if someone's there to keep an eye on it, we can alter that. The likes of SARDI gets through, and we can change a fence, and it's all active within 15 minutes. The likes of up at Wintinna, because it's a little bit further from Tower to the collars, it probably takes about half an hour. But there are some cases on really large properties where they're 80, 90,000 acre paddocks where it may take half a day to give a new instruction. But if you know in advance, which most people do, you can plan for that not to be an issue. But basically, the more cattle you're asking to give a new instruction to at the same time in a larger area that's geographically spread out, it does take longer. So you just got to plan ahead a little bit.
Thanks, Jason. I'm mindful to mention too that to reiterate what Jason's saying, this technology is never intended to replace people and our knowledge and understanding of the country and what our livestock need, but gee, it's a handy tool. Just looking at the participation list, welcome everyone. There's people come from far and wide. I thought I might use this as a segue to just explain what dead finish means. For those of you that are down south, you might not know that it's a endearing term for a local acacia species that grows up north. That's Acacia tetragonophylla. It's a rather prickly, long-lived acacia. So that's locally known as dead finish. So if you're wondering why the paddock's called something grim, it's actually after a plant and more than anything else. Megan, there's a question here about legislation and how likely or when may legislation change come into South Australia?
Yep, so at the moment, the legislation is under review by the regulatory body in South Australia. So that process can take up to another 4 years. It's a 12-monthly thing, and they can extend each 12 months up until 4 years has run out. So they've already extended once, and so they have the opportunity to extend a few more times, which is probably fairly likely given that South Australia is also going through a larger Animal Welfare Act review. So there's a lot of reviews going on in that like a regulatory space at the moment. So it is likely that it will take a fairly long time. My understanding is that it is fairly likely that the legislation will change to allow virtual fencing. It's just a matter of what that actually looks like and what the legislation states that we can and can't do, what the prescribed species are, and whether it's a device by device thing or a blanket change. So I think the short answer is it's fairly likely. It can probably take a fair while, and we're not sure what the actual change will look like. So that's something that we're all just waiting to find out, because obviously PIRSA aren't in charge of that review. That sits with DEW. So we're sort of trying to just be a support agency to them, and try and pull together some information through our research and also our engagement with producers to help support that decision.
Thanks, Megan. So if I'm sitting here and I'm just busting for this technology to get approved, what advice would you give those of us who are working on the ground to help push that legislative change?
Yeah, sure. So the main thing that producers can do is actually probably write to your industry bodies. So the people that advocate for you are like Livestock SA. I've been in touch with some of my colleagues at Livestock SA, and they are kind of working with some of our policy people and aware of what's going on in this space. So they're probably a good organisation to advocate through, as well as, you know, if you've got local farming groups and stuff that a lot of the members are keen, it's probably a good place to start as well in putting together letters of support or putting your case forward of how technology like that might help your enterprise and help your profitability and managing your livestock, is basically where we're at for producers at the moment. Yeah, there's not a lot that PIRSA and SARDI can do. It's really got to come from the producers and the end users that are going to get the benefit out of this. So that's probably my advice at the moment.
Thanks, Megan. And would you be able to give us a quick update on which states and territories that it is legal in?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, virtual fencing is allowed in Queensland, in Western Australia and Tasmania and the Northern Territory. So it's South Australia, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria that are waiting for that change to come through. And I know there is talk in those states of potential changes, and people are trying to push things along a little bit there. So yeah, hopefully at some point we have some legislation that's fairly uniform across the country and can support farmers in adopting some of these technologies.
Megan, in Western Australia, it's not fully commercially usable yet. We're only using it under trials through the University of Western Australia and a large customer we've got over there. So it's in the process. We put our application in. We're just going through the process at the moment. So it's on a trial, closely monitored like yourself, closely regulated, which I think is a good thing because it gives the outcome more credibility.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that, Jason.
Great stuff. Well, that was a fantastic Q&A. We've still got a couple of minutes if anyone's got burning questions they'd like to type into the chat or raise their hand. As you can see, the implications that this technology has for our ability to rest and spell country and to really manage grazing behaviour and total grazing pressure is amazing. And as Megan mentioned, you know, we're starting to put together some numbers, and for those of you that are up north, you already know this, but to put in a cattle fence at the moment, you're looking in an excess of $4,500 a kilometre, including your clearing. So to really best manage our country, we do need to be looking forward at alternative ways of really managing grazing pressure and improving ground cover. And I think this technology, you know, it sounds really exciting, like it could be one of the many tools that helps producers. So if we don't have any more questions, we might wrap it up there. Please stay in touch. If you do have any questions following this Teams meeting, please send me an email. So if you need any support, please reach out to myself, and I know Megan would be more than happy to answer any questions on an email as well. We look forward to being able to share some more outputs from this project. So watch this space, watch your inbox, keep an eye on the Arid Lands Landscape Board Facebook page and across the Outback, and we'll continue to share information. So a big thanks to Frankie and Jake for virtually hosting us and being such an important part of it, of a really amazing trial. Megan, thank you for all your hard work. We know how much work you do in the background. We really appreciate it. And Jason, thank you for sharing your technical expertise and extending yourself interstate and all the other with all the other projects you do as well. So I think unless we've got,
I'd like to
sorry.
also add a double up on thanking Frankie and Jake for the quality of the quietness of their cattle there, because we deal with all sorts of cattle of all sorts of temperaments, and their cattle would be the quietest we've dealt with. They just are unbelievably quiet. They responded super quickly. They learned quickly. And I mean, Jake and Frankie are very much the same. They're very steady and take the right approach to everything that reflects in their cattle. So it's a credit to them, and they're a pleasure to work with.
Oh, thanks, Jason. No, we wouldn't. We're really grateful that we were able to take part. We're really trying to be able to rotate cattle around, and if virtual fencing can become a thing in SA, then it'll hugely help us to do that. And we wouldn't have done it if, once we got explained how the process works with the stimulus and the audio, it's not a cruel way of doing it. It's less power than an electric fence.
Brilliant. Okay, well, without further ado, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us online on this beautiful Monday afternoon, and I hope you enjoyed your first virtual field day in the Arid Lands this year. We hope to hold some more soon. So cheerio, everyone.
Thank you. Very good.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.